Call this meeting to order. Joint public hearing for April 10th, 2023. First, we need the approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Miles. All in favor? Motion passes. We have a joint public hearing of the Planning Board and the Commissioners. The public hearing is a request for text amendment 2023-04 traffic impact analysis amendments. I declare the public hearing open and for staff presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board, members of the Planning Board. The one item on the joint public hearing agenda tonight is text amendment 2023-04. Specifically, it's an amendment to UDO section 6.13 pertaining to traffic impact analysis. A traffic impact analysis evaluates the potential effects of proposed projects on the surrounding and supporting transportation infrastructure and services. A TIA determines if the adverse impacts constitute significant impacts, and if so, how these significant impacts can be mitigated. I think as we go through this presentation tonight, it's important to keep in mind what a transportation assessment is versus what it's not. It is essentially a study to determine what's the current situation and how this particular development will influence that situation on particular road segments or intersections. Transportation impact will start with a scope. This is an evaluation of, okay, what intersections and what road segments are going to be taken in consideration as part of this assessment. It deals with current traffic, and while a lot of people will be recognizing something like this, which you see on Google Maps, or even possibly the AADT maps, which are provided by the North Carolina Department of Transportation, typically these assessments will take it a bit further. This is an example of a traffic impact assessment that was done for East Wake High School. You'll see a whole bunch of numbers on here. It includes AM and PM peak trip, as well as not just the through traffic, but how many cars are turning left, how many cars are turning right. It's a very deep dive analysis. It also takes a look at the future traffic if they don't build the project. We realize we're growing. There's going to be impacts and increased volumes on these intersections regardless if particular developments are constructed or not. They then take a look at it if they do construct the particular project and what happens with the levels of service. Those levels of service, as we've mentioned in the past, are on a scale from A through F. And depending upon the circumstance, a level of service C, D, E might not be a bad thing if you want those vehicles to go slow. It's all context specific to determine how that needs to be determined. And from there comes the recommended improvements. These are all done by a licensed traffic engineer. Somebody who's gone through schooling and study and accreditation to be able to make these type of determinations. Which brings us to the text amendment tonight for UDO section 6.13. The goal tonight is to explain how the proposed text amendments are going to lower the thresholds on when the town can require a TIA, expands the area for the study, not only in terms of the thresholds on the initial area versus the expanded area, but those areas as a whole, and then provides clarification regarding what additional elements need to be taken in consideration. Right now, our traffic impact analysis says that until a project hits 100 peak trip hours, there's no transportation impact analysis required. There's no special exemptions to this. There's no planning director override. It's just a base of 100 peak trips per hour. As an example, Jasper Place, the residential subdivision that's under construction by Water Plant and Gannon, that does not generate 100 peak trip hours within their development. But they still realized that there was necessary road improvements that needed to be done as part of that project, and those were accomplished. The proposed is 50 peak trip hours. Now, one of the questions might come up of, okay, why not lower? 50 as itself is extremely aggressive. It's actually one of the lowest thresholds in Wake County, and it's amongst the lowest in North Carolina. Going any lower of this would be deemed unreasonable. We also expanded to 150 average daily trips as a threshold. Different types of developments will trigger this threshold. Certain types of uses will trigger this threshold, as well as if there's certain existing traffic conditions. If you have a project that's going in and the level of trips or the level of service is already to the point of failing, it would trigger TIA. So some of the uses that might not right now require a TI would be a concrete plant. The impacts that are associated with the in and out of concrete trucks and dump trucks, you might not get to the level where the volume of traffic is going to warrant a TIA. But the character and the movements of those vehicles, as well as the impacts on the road infrastructure, might have impacts of their own. Additionally, smaller subdivisions, ones that don't have those 100 peak trip hours, those would suddenly become necessary. As an example, this is a draft of a subdivision in another municipality where it's only 75 units. Under our existing regulations, this wouldn't need a TIA. And as I mentioned, situations where you have high volumes of traffic. This is an example of a level of service D, I believe is what the text said. Situations like this, if you were going to construct something along there where you're going to be adding to that traffic, it would require a TIA. Moving on to the study area component. Right now, if the trips are under 5,000, you would not need to go beyond a quarter-mile radius. As an example, the vacant site that's next to Walmart, that's a quarter-mile radius. You can see it picks up the intersection of East Gannon and Old 264 and Industrial Drive and East Gannon. But outside of that, it really doesn't take much into consideration. How are those vehicles in generation of regular travel patterns within the community, how are those being influenced? We're expanding the minimum area to a half mile, and that's what this would look like. It starts picking up additional intersections to take in consideration. We also lowered the threshold for the expanded version, and that combined with the expanded radius of 1 mile would suddenly start picking up things more like this, where it takes a much more comprehensive look at how these intersections would be influenced by the particular development. Finally, the third part of this text amendment is it provides clarification. Now, when we look at transportation with a scope for TIAs, we right now take in consideration those general transit approvals. And there's provisions in there that allow us to expand that. But hypothetically, let's say we have a development someplace on Perry Curtis Road. Something like this, the developer might say, okay, we'll look at where Perry Curtis meets 96 and where Perry Curtis meets 39. Okay, those are both within those thresholds. But what about all those other intersections? Think about it. How are these people going to go to the grocery store, to the doctor, to work? Suddenly, the impact of these neighborhoods is going to have a potential greater impact beyond those initial radiuses. The text amendment clarifies that it allows the planning director to include additional intersections based on local transportation patterns. So staff's recommendation tonight is to accept public comment regarding these text amendments and then refer the matter to the planning board for recommendation. And I'm available if you have any questions regarding this text amendment.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions from the Board of Commissioners? Commissioner Laux?
No, not at this time.
Commissioner Harrison?
No.
Commissioner Clark? Commissioner Miles?
None.
Commissioner Baxter?
Yes. You said that the planning director would be allowed to add study areas, but not take them away, correct? If an area is required, then it will be studied.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and specifically, if you look at, I just realized there's one additional item that was included. Yeah, the language in particular is 613 subsection 7C study area. And it says the director has the right to, sorry, it is add or subtract, I was wrong. It's add or subtract intersections on a specific study area characteristics and local transportation plans. This text amendment adds in the words and local transit or local traffic patterns. The other element that I forgot to mention is at the very end of this section, one of the end deliverables that is required is a graphic representation showing the aerial photo and how the transportation improvements would be configured, as well as the volumes of traffic at those particular intersections. And that's in section 61311, subsection F. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Any further questions? Any questions from the planning board?
Yeah. Mike, did you have, I remember looking through here, I can't find it now, but do you have any stipulations for how the criteria for growth rate is determined or provided by the engineer for these studies?
It's not in this section. It is actually a fluctuating number, and it is determined by a combination of the town as well as NCDOT.
Okay. Is there any way to clarify that, to say what are those parameters that they're using to determine that? Say if it's a growth rate of the last 2 years, average, or something of that nature, how do they determine that?
It's not written in here, but it's actually it's much more extended than the past 2 years.
Okay.
I'm not a transportation engineer, so I can't speak fully on that. But these are reviewed based on recommendation of a third-party engineer that we currently hire to review these.
Okay.
Does this regulation require any more or will put any undue stress on town staff?
No, and I say that because of how our current structure is set up. Right now, we subcontract with a third-party engineer, and the applicant is required to pay the fees for that third-party engineer for them to do the review to make sure that the TI has been done correctly and that it is accurate. So it's a separate outside consulting firm, so it does not result in additional time for staff. The only additional effort would be us coordinating with that third-party engineer to make sure that these reviews are done, because this will increase the number of TIAs that we receive.
Town staff does review those, correct, though?
We review those, but in terms of the technical elements, we rely on the engineers.
So
We
having
review in
addi-
terms of scope, content, details, but in terms of the actual recommendations and calculations, that is something that frankly is way above my pay grade.
Yeah, but having extra reports to review and then possibly looking at a study area and determining if you need to add intersections, so on and so forth, you're saying any impact would be minimal?
Correct.
Okay.
Anyone else from the planning board? Hearing none, we will now take public comment from the podium on my left. If anyone that wishes to speak in favor, please state your name, your address for the record. Anyone in favor? Hearing none. If there's anyone who wishes to speak in opposition, they may come to the podium on my left. None. If anyone wishes to speak neither for or against, but just has something to say, come to the podium on my left. Hearing none. There is no one else that wishes to speak. I will close the public hearing and refer the matter to the planning board for their consideration. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
In the second, in favor? So moved.